Okay, so get this. Imagine waking up one morning and the leader who's been in power for decades is just gone.
Yeah.
That's what just happened in Syria. Bashar al-Assad, he's fled the country
Wow.
after 13 years of brutal civil war.
13 years? That's a long time.
It is. We've got a ton of sources for you today. News articles from Reuters, Al Jazeera. We've got on-the-ground reports from Damascus.
Oh,
Even whispers from the Syrian embassy in Moscow.
interesting.
This is huge.
Yeah,
Not just a change at the top, but a potential seismic shift for the entire Middle East.
I can imagine.
So buckle up because we are diving deep into what Assad's fall really means and what might come next.
Yeah, what's really striking is how fast it all happened. I mean, it feels like just a few weeks ago, the Assad regime seemed unshakable.
Right.
And now he's seeking asylum in Russia.
So how did this even happen? I mean, Assad's grip on power has been so tight for so long.
Well, an alliance of militias spearheaded by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS.
HTF.
That's a former al-Qaeda affiliate. They managed to seize control of Damascus
Wow.
in a lightning advance from their stronghold in Idlib. They forced Assad to flee, basically ending his family's 50-year rule.
Wow.
And get this, it took them only 12 days.
12 days.
Yeah.
That's almost unbelievable.
It is.
What's the situation like on the ground right now?
Well, reporters are describing an eerie calm in Damascus. There's a curfew in place, shops are closed, and HTS fighters from Idlib, they're patrolling the streets.
Wow.
It's a scene that would have been unimaginable just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I bet. It must feel so surreal for the people living there.
Absolutely.
What does this shift mean for the average Syrian on the street?
Well, Reuters spoke to a fighter named Furtis Omar, who was part of the rebel advance. He's from Idlib, been fighting the Assad regime for over a decade.
Wow.
And now that the fighting is over, he just wants to go back to his farm. He's quoted as saying, "We had a purpose and a goal, and now we're done with it. We want the state and security forces to be in charge." It really highlights, I think, the human cost of this conflict and the longing for peace and stability that so many Syrians share.
Absolutely. There are millions of Syrian refugees, right, scattered across the world.
Yeah.
Could this mean they'll finally be able to return home?
That's a huge question, and the answer is complicated. While Assad's fall offers a glimmer of hope for return, the reality on the ground is, well, it's complex.
Yeah,
Their homes may be destroyed, their communities shattered, the scars of war run deep.
of course.
And then there's the question of HTS, their ideology, their ability to govern, whether they can ensure the safety of returning refugees,
Right.
especially those who are associated with the Assad regime.
So speaking of HTS,
Yeah.
how does a former al-Qaeda affiliate suddenly become the dominant force in Syria? It seems like a pretty radical change.
Yeah, HTS has been trying to rebrand itself in recent years, kind of distancing themselves from their al-Qaeda roots and presenting themselves as a more moderate force focused on rebuilding Syria. It's a fascinating transformation and, raises a lot of questions about their true intentions and ideology.
It does. What's the international community's reaction to all of this?
Well, it's been a mixed bag, honestly. While some see Assad's removal as a positive step, there are deep concerns about HTS and the potential for an Islamist government in Syria. Western countries in particular, they're wary of HTS's past and they're taking a cautious approach.
But what about Russia? They've been Assad's main backer for years.
Yeah, this is a major blow to Russia's influence in the Middle East. Granting Assad asylum was a necessary move to ensure his safety,
Of course.
but it also signals a significant loss of power and prestige for them in the region.
Yeah.
They've invested heavily in Syria, both militarily and financially, and Assad's fall represents a strategic setback for them.
Makes sense. Iran, too, has been a key ally for Assad.
Absolutely. Iran has provided crucial support to the Assad regime. They view Syria as a vital link in their regional strategy.
Right.
So the loss of Assad, it significantly weakens their position in the Middle East and potentially disrupts their supply lines to Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Wow.
It's a significant setback for them, and it will be interesting to see how they adapt to this new reality.
So then how has Turkey, who supported the opposition, reacted to this development?
This is a major win for Turkey. They've been a staunch critic of Assad and have supported various rebel groups throughout the
All
conflict.
right.
Now, with Assad gone and a group they've backed, at least indirectly, in control of Damascus, Turkey's influence in Syria has grown considerably.
Okay.
It's a significant geopolitical shift, and one that could have long-term implications for the region.
Absolutely. Where does Israel stand in all of this? They've had a contentious relationship with Assad and his alliance with Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Yeah, Israel is very publicly celebrating Assad's downfall. They view this as a victory, directly attributing it to their sustained campaign of airstrikes against Hezbollah targets within Syria, which, of course, weakened Assad's position. They've also been taking steps to secure their border with Syria, even pushing tanks into a demilitarized buffer zone.
Wow. So what about the U.S.? Have they weighed in on this?
The U.S. has been relatively quiet, but they did launch airstrikes against ISIS targets in northeastern Syria shortly after Assad's fall.
Okay.
It seems their main concern right now is preventing ISIS from exploiting the chaos and regaining a foothold in the country.
So speaking of chaos, what's the situation like outside of Damascus? Are things as calm in the rest of the country?
Reports are coming in of looting in Latakia, the heartland of Assad's Alawite sect, and there's a lot of uncertainty about what will happen to the Syrian army. Some units have reportedly surrendered to HTS, while others seem to be holding their ground. The situation is very fluid.
And the leader of HTS, Abu Muhammad al-Golani, has been making some pretty bold statements, hasn't he?
Oh, he's certainly trying to project an image of strength and control. Golani has vowed to rebuild Syria, talking about creating a beacon for the Islamic nation. But he's also been surprisingly pragmatic. He's called for unity among Syrians and even said that he's willing to meet with Assad's prime minister, Mohammed Jalali, to discuss a peaceful transfer of power.
Wow, that's a pretty surprising development. I mean, you'd think there would be bad blood after years of conflict.
Yeah, I think it's a sign that both sides recognize the need for stability. Jalali, for his part, has indicated a willingness to work with Golani to prevent further bloodshed and ensure a smooth transition. Of course, whether this actually happens, remains to be seen.
Of course. All of this raises a really important question. Can HTS actually create a stable and functioning government in Syria?
Yeah.
I mean, they're starting from a pretty complicated position.
Right. And their past as an al-Qaeda affiliate will be a major hurdle. They'll face skepticism from the international community, and they'll have to prove that they can govern effectively and inclusively. There are also concerns about potential sectarian violence, especially against the Alawites, who are closely associated with the Assad regime.
Right. There are reports of the White Helmets, the volunteer rescue group, searching for hidden detainees.
Oh, wow.
It's a chilling reminder of the brutality of the Assad regime.
It is.
It really underscores the challenges ahead. I mean, Syria has a long and painful history of human rights abuses, and it will take a concerted effort from both HTS and the international community to ensure that those abuses are not repeated.
Absolutely.
It sounds like the situation is still very much in flux,
Yeah.
with a lot of unknowns. What can you tell us of the general mood among the Syrian people?
Well, amidst the uncertainty and fear, there's also a sense of relief, even jubilation in some quarters. Families are being reunited, former prisoners are celebrating their freedom,
Wow.
and many Syrians are cautiously optimistic about the possibility of a new beginning. But there's also, deep-seated trauma from years of conflict and repression, and it will take time for those wounds to heal.
What's clear is that this is a pivotal moment in Syria's history. A dictator has been overthrown, but the path ahead is far from certain. It's a complex and constantly evolving situation, and we'll be following it closely in the days and weeks to come.
Absolutely. What we're seeing is a power vacuum emerging, and it's too early to say who will ultimately fill it. The next few months will be critical in determining the future of Syria, and the stakes couldn't be higher.
This has been a whirlwind of information. What are your initial thoughts on all of this? What stands out to you?
I think what strikes me most is the sheer speed and unpredictability of these events. Just a few weeks ago, the Assad regime seemed firmly entrenched,
Yeah.
and now it's gone. It's a reminder that even the most seemingly stable situations can change dramatically and unexpectedly.
Absolutely. And it highlights the need for nuanced and informed analysis, especially in a situation as complex as this one.
Right. We can't afford to rely on simplistic narratives or easy answers. We need to be willing to engage with the complexities, the competing perspectives, and the often uncomfortable truths that shape these events.
I think that's a great place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into the fall of Assad.
Yeah, we have. We've explored the immediate aftermath of his departure, the key players involved, and the potential implications for Syria, the region, and the world.
But this is just the beginning. In the next part, we'll take a closer look at the potential for sectarian violence, the challenges of rebuilding a shattered nation, and the long road ahead for the Syrian people.
And we'll also delve deeper into the global implications of Assad's fall, exploring how this seismic shift might reshape the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East and beyond.
Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into the fall of Assad, where we'll continue to unpack this complex and evolving situation.
So we were just talking about all the challenges facing Syria now that Assad is gone.
Right.
This power vacuum, it's just palpable, and with so many different factions vying for control,
Yeah.
the potential for violence, especially along sectarian lines, it's a major concern.
Yeah, it's easy to imagine things just spiraling out of control.
Right.
You have decades of pent-up resentment and anger, fueled by the Assad regime's brutality.
Of course, yeah.
What's to stop those tensions from boiling over now that he's gone?
Yeah, the situation it's incredibly fragile. There are these deep divisions within Syrian society, and the fear is that Assad's removal could unleash those divisions.
Right.
And lead to widespread sectarian violence, especially targeting the Alawites, who held significant power under Assad.
Yeah, and we've already seen reports of looting in Latakia, a predominantly Alawite city. What's being done to prevent those kinds of incidents from escalating?
Well, HTS has made some, I guess, promising statements, emphasizing the need for unity and reconciliation.
Okay.
They've called for calm and restraint and have even offered protection to Alawites who fear reprisals.
Okay.
But, it's unclear how much control HTS actually has over its fighters on the ground.
Right.
Some of whom may be driven by a desire for revenge.
And what about the international community? Are they doing anything to kind of help stabilize the situation, prevent further violence?
Well, the UN Security Council, they held an emergency meeting to discuss the situation in Syria, but so far there's no consensus on how to proceed. Some countries are calling for immediate intervention, to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe,
Yeah.
while others are advocating for a more cautious approach, arguing that direct involvement could further destabilize the country.
You mentioned the potential for a humanitarian catastrophe. Can you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, Syria has already endured 13 years of brutal civil war.
Right.
And the humanitarian situation is dire. Millions of people have been displaced. Infrastructure is in ruins. Basic services like healthcare and education, they're severely disrupted.
Wow.
Now, with this added uncertainty of Assad's removal and the rise of HTS, there are fears that the situation could deteriorate even further.
Yeah. What about the millions of Syrian refugees scattered across the globe?
Yeah.
Could they return home now that Assad is gone, or is it still too dangerous?
That's a really complex issue. While Assad's removal might offer a glimmer of hope for return, the reality on the ground is really daunting.
Right.
Many refugees' homes have been destroyed, their communities are shattered, and the fear of retribution is very real.
Yeah.
And then there's the question of HTS and their ideology. Many refugees, especially those from minority groups, may just not feel safe returning to a Syria ruled by a group with such a controversial past.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about HTS and their vision for Syria. Their leader, Abu Mohammed al-Golani, has talked about rebuilding the country and creating a beacon for the Islamic nation. What does that even mean in practical terms?
Yeah, it's tough to say for sure.
Right.
Golani has been trying to rebrand HTS, distancing themselves from their al-Qaeda roots and presenting, a more moderate image.
Right.
They've emphasized the need for unity and reconciliation among Syrians.
Okay.
They've even offered to cooperate with the international community on issues like counterterrorism and humanitarian aid.
But can they really be trusted?
Right, that's the question.
Many Western countries are understandably skeptical, given their history.
Yeah, it's too early to tell, honestly, what their true intentions are.
Right.
Some analysts believe they're genuinely trying to moderate their stance and become a legitimate political force. Others see this as a tactical maneuver, a way to gain power and consolidate control before revealing their, their true agenda.
Yeah.
Only time will tell which interpretation is correct.
And they certainly face a daunting task, right? Rebuilding Syria after years of war will require, a monumental effort.
Oh, absolutely.
Where do they even begin?
Yeah, the challenges are just immense. The economy is in shambles, the infrastructure is devastated, and there are these deep-seated divisions within Syrian society.
Right.
HTS will need to address all of these issues, while simultaneously trying to establish their legitimacy, both domestically and internationally.
What about the Syrian people themselves? What role do they play in this transition?
I mean, ultimately, the future of Syria lies with the Syrian people. They have endured, just unimaginable suffering.
Yeah.
And have shown incredible resilience.
Right.
Their voices need to be heard, and their aspirations need to be respected as the country moves forward.
There's been a lot of focus on, I guess, the negative aspects of this transition.
Yeah.
But are there any potential positives that might emerge from this situation?
Well, one positive is that Assad's removal could potentially open up a space for a more inclusive and democratic political system in Syria.
Hey, yeah.
For years, the country was stifled under his authoritarian rule, and now there's at least the possibility, however slim, for a more participatory form of governance to emerge.
It sounds like a long shot, but it's certainly something to hope for.
Absolutely. And there's also the potential for economic revitalization. Syria has vast resources, both human and natural, that have been underutilized or mismanaged for decades.
Right.
With the right policies and investments, the country could rebuild its economy and create opportunities for its people.
But that all hinges on HTS's ability to govern effectively and gain international legitimacy, which, as we've discussed, are far from guaranteed.
Right, exactly. The road ahead for Syria is long and fraught with challenges. There are many potential pitfalls, and the outcome remains uncertain. But amid all the darkness, there's also a glimmer of hope, a chance for a new beginning.
It's almost impossible to wrap our heads around the scale of this transition. We're talking about the potential for a complete restructuring of Syrian society, politics, and economics.
It's a monumental undertaking.
It is.
And one that will have ripple effects throughout the region and beyond.
It's fascinating to think about how this might reshape the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. We've already touched on how this impacts Russia, Iran, Turkey, and Israel. But what about the broader implications?
Well, one key question is how this will affect the balance of power in the region.
Right.
With Assad gone and Russia's influence diminished, there's a vacuum that other powers like Saudi Arabia and the UAE might try to fill. This could lead to increased competition and instability in the region.
And what about the global implications? Could this have a knock-on effect on other conflicts or geopolitical tensions?
It's certainly possible. The Syrian conflict has been a major flashpoint in international relations for years,
Right.
drawing in global powers and fueling tensions between them. Assad's removal could potentially alter those dynamics in unpredictable ways.
We've also seen how this has impacted the fight against ISIS.
Mm.
Will Assad's departure help or hinder efforts to combat terrorism in the region?
That's a complex question. On the one hand, Assad's removal could potentially weaken ISIS by depriving them of a common enemy and a recruiting tool.
Right.
But on the other hand, the chaos and instability that follows his departure could also create opportunities for ISIS to regroup and regain territory.
It seems like every development in this situation has the potential to both help and hinder progress in the fight against terrorism.
It's a constant balancing act, and one that requires a nuanced understanding of the complexities on the ground.
It's clear that the world is watching Syria very closely right now, and with good reason. The stakes are incredibly high, and the outcome is, well, it's uncertain. What are some of the key things we should be paying attention to as this situation continues to unfold?
Well, one thing to watch is how HTS consolidates its power and governs the country. Can they establish control? Can they provide stability and gain the trust of the Syrian people? Or will their rule be marked by repression, instability, and continued conflict?
And what about the international community? What role will they play in shaping the future of Syria?
The international community has a responsibility to support the Syrian people in their quest for peace and stability.
Absolutely.
This means providing humanitarian assistance, promoting dialogue and reconciliation, and working to prevent further violence and human rights abuses.
This all sounds incredibly challenging.
It is, but it's also an opportunity. The fall of Assad has created a window for change, a chance to build a better future for Syria.
Yeah.
It's up to the Syrian people, with the support of the international community, to seize that opportunity and create a more just and peaceful society.
This has been a really insightful conversation. I feel like we've gone beyond the headlines and really dug into the complexities of this situation.
Yeah, it's a constantly evolving story and one that we'll continue to follow closely.
But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, is there anything else that stands out to you? Any key takeaways you'd like to emphasize?
I think what's most important to remember is that Amidst all the, the geopolitical maneuvering and strategic calculations, there are real people whose lives are being profoundly affected by these events.
Of course, yeah.
We need to keep their stories, their hope, and their struggles at the forefront of our minds as we try to make sense of this complex and ever-changing situation.
That's a powerful reminder. We've spent the last two parts of this deep dive, really trying to understand the situation in Syria. Assad is gone. HTS is in control. It feels like the future is just like one giant question mark.
And it is a giant question mark. But that doesn't mean we can't, at least try and make some educated guesses about what might happen next.
Right.
So let's do a little thought experiment.
Okay.
What are some potential scenarios for Syria's future?
Okay.
And what would they mean for everyone involved?
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
Let's start with the best case scenario. What does a successful transition even look like in Syria? What would need to happen for things to actually turn out well?
Well, I think in the best case scenario, HTS manages to consolidate its power, without resorting to excessive force or repression.
Right.
They establish a functioning government, restore basic services. They begin the long process of rebuilding the country's shattered infrastructure.
And they would need to address the concerns of the international community, right?
So absolutely.
Yeah.
And in this, this ideal scenario, HTS would make a genuine effort to distance themselves from their extremist past.
Right.
Demonstrate a commitment to, to human rights and inclusivity.
Okay.
And engage constructively with the international community.
Yeah.
This would, open the door to foreign aid and investment, which would be crucial for rebuilding Syria's economy, creating opportunities for its people.
Now, what about the Syrian people themselves? How would they factor into this, best case scenario?
Oh, their role is, it's crucial. In this, positive outcome, the Syrian people, exhausted from years of war and division, would embrace the opportunity for peace and unity.
Yeah.
They would actively participate in the rebuilding process, working together to heal the wounds of the past and create a more just and equitable society.
Okay, so it's a hopeful picture, but, it feels very fragile.
Yeah.
What are some potential obstacles that could kind of prevent this best-case scenario from playing out?
Oh, there are so many. Internally, HTS might struggle to maintain control, govern effectively. They could face resistance from other armed groups,
Right.
internal divisions within their own ranks, or a popular backlash against their rule. And externally, the international community, particularly Western countries, might remain skeptical of HTS's intentions, making it really difficult for them to access the resources and support they need to rebuild the country.
Okay, so let's flip the script. What does the worst-case scenario look like?
Oh.
What should we be, the most worried about?
Well, in the worst-case scenario, Syria descends into further chaos and violence. HTS, unable to consolidate power, faces challenges from rival factions,
Right.
leading to, a renewed civil war. This could draw in neighboring countries, reignite sectarian tensions, and create, just a breeding ground for extremist groups like ISIS.
That sounds terrifying. What would the consequences be, both for Syria and the wider world?
It would be, just a humanitarian catastrophe of just immense proportions. Millions more Syrians would be displaced. The country's already fragile infrastructure would be further destroyed. And, the cycle of violence and suffering would just continue.
Yeah.
Regionally, it would destabilize neighboring countries, fuel refugee flows, and potentially spark wider conflicts. And globally, it would, strengthen extremist groups, undermine international security, and basically create a black hole of instability in a strategically vital region.
It's a bleak outlook.
Yeah.
And one that obviously we all hope will never come to pass. But, it's important to acknowledge the possibility, however unpleasant it might be.
Right. It's essential to, to understand the full spectrum of potential outcomes from the most optimistic to the most pessimistic. This allows us to make informed decisions, advocate for effective policies, and prepare for the challenges ahead.
So we have these two extremes, the best case and the worst case.
Yeah.
Realistically, things will probably fall, somewhere in between, right?
Absolutely. Syria's future is unlikely to be neatly categorized. It's more likely to be, a messy, complex, and unpredictable process with both progress and setbacks along the way.
What are some other, potential scenarios that we should be thinking about? What might a more nuanced, middle ground outcome look like?
Well, One possibility is that HTS manages to establish a degree of stability, but, at the cost of political freedom and human rights.
Right.
They could become, a new authoritarian regime similar to Assad's, albeit with a different ideology. Or we could see like a fragmented Syria
Right.
with different factions controlling different parts of the country, leading to, just like a prolonged stalemate and this ongoing instability.
And then there's the kind of wild card of the international community's involvement.
Yeah.
How might their actions shape, the trajectory of this transition?
Yeah, their role will be, absolutely crucial if they choose to engage constructively, providing aid, supporting political dialogue, promoting accountability. They could help kind of nudge Syria towards a more positive outcome.
Right.
But if they remain disengaged, divided, or pursue competing agendas, it could exacerbate, those existing tensions and make a successful transition even more difficult.
I'm struck by just how much uncertainty surrounds this whole situation. It feels like, honestly, almost anything could happen.
And that's precisely why it's so important to pay attention, to stay informed,
Right.
and to engage in, just thoughtful discussions about the future of Syria. This isn't just some abstract geopolitical event happening in a faraway land.
Right.
It's a human drama, with very real consequences for millions of people.
So I guess what are some of the key things, that we as individuals should be thinking about as we kind of watch all of this unfold?
I think first and foremost, we need to remember the human cost of this conflict.
Yeah.
There are millions of Syrians who have been displaced, traumatized, lost loved ones. Their stories need to be heard. Their needs must be addressed.
And beyond just like empathy, is there anything we can actually do to help?
Oh, absolutely. We can support reputable humanitarian organizations working on the ground in Syria. We
Right.
can advocate for policies that promote, peace and human rights, and just stay informed about the situation so we can engage in, meaningful conversations and hold our leaders accountable. Even small actions can make a difference.
Well, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. It's easy to get overwhelmed by the complexity of it all, but you've helped break it down in a way that feels like both insightful and actionable.
Well, it's a constantly evolving situation and there are no easy answers, but by, by understanding the key players, the potential scenarios and the factors at play, we can kind of equip ourselves to make informed decisions and contribute to, a more peaceful and just future for Syria and the world.
It's a reminder that we're not just passive observers of history. We all have a role to play in shaping the future, however small it may seem. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fall of Assad.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep engaging. That's how we make a difference.